Join us, support us, join us, support us. Just because the media is masses, we have draconian laws, we have brutal police action, and we have the judiciary working at the behest of the political leaders. Join us, support us.
So, like, ever since I started all this research on the Juan Corona victims, not even Juan Corona himself, but the victims, I don't know, I've been feeling, I don't think obligated is the right word, but maybe compelled, inspired, or whatever, to tell their story. Didn't really expect to find too much about the victims, and it's just like I've found so much information about each one of them. Some of them even information that went back to like their childhoods, and it just, the whole thing really kind of makes me sad. I think the part that bothers me the most is the way our community reacted to that, treating it like a couple dogs were hitting the road, like it was not a big deal. They were really intrigued with like Juan Corona. They were like shocked that it happened in their town, but when it came to the victims themselves, it's like they weren't even human. Like, I read some of the quotes that were like going around at that time on the news stations and stuff. There was a big argument between Marysville and Yuba City, and like Marysville was known as like the town that had all of the wino tramps or fruit tramps. It's where all the vagrants would kind of hang out. And then Yuba City, on the other hand, like had this reputation of being like higher class people, and I guess in a way it's still kind of like that. You don't see as many homeless roaming around, you know, Yuba City as you do in Marysville, and I've lived in both cities, so I feel like I know pretty well how that is. But Yuba City was actually in the paper saying, oh, we don't have vagrants, we don't have winos, and Marysville would fire back, well, your killer came from Yuba City. And it was like Sheriff Whitaker, who was the main sheriff, and Size 11, all these guys, it was just like, this is such a huge black eye on Yuba City's reputation. They were just trying to always say, well, the vagrants, they all came from Marysville, which they did. Most of them came from Wino Park, which is a little grassy area right next to Silver Dollar. But it was just such a huge fight about who had ownership over this tragedy. And it's like everybody forgot that like Juan Corona was responsible. And yes, I'm going to say that I do think he was guilty. He admitted to these crimes in 2011. He said he did it because they were winos and the world didn't need them. They didn't have friends or family, which totally isn't true. Most of them did have family. I don't know, just the whole thing just was really sad. Like nationwide, there was jokes being made, like on the late night shows, like we have David Letterman and all that. They would say, oh, what's the fastest thing on two wheels? Oh, it's a wino on a bicycle going through Yuba City. I mean, it was just like, fuck, like that is just so callous to even react that way when these were 25 men and they believe that there's more out there that they just quit looking for. Buried out there, and nobody gave a shit, and it just really upsets me to think that our community didn't care about these guys. Just like when we went out to the cemetery, the ones that were buried out there, it was said that they didn't have family, but it turns out that some of them did, that just their families couldn't afford to bury them. It was sudden, or they had already been autopsied, and whatever by the time they even knew that their family member was dead. And some of them were elderly, sisters and brothers or aunts and uncles, parents. And these guys were all older. I think the youngest one was Kenneth Whitaker. He was 40. The oldest, I think, was about 65. So a lot of their family was older, and I don't think they could afford to bury these guys. But either way, Judy Freeman of Marysville stepped up, housewife, paid for the marker, or tried to fundraise for it. And she like tried to raise money. Like she ended up raising $732. And the cost that she was quoted was $5,000 for this marker. And she did everything. She went to the papers. She did all kinds of stuff to try to like get the community to like step up and take ownership and, you know, bury these guys, like treat them like people, you know. And $732, like, come on, guys. Like, where was all of our local funeral homes or, you know, or the sheriff's department or whoever? I don't know, just your average Joe. Like, why didn't they step up? Like, the families, they weren't contacted, like, with enough time to do something. Chicago Firm actually, like, handled funeral stuff, stepped up and paid for most of it. But I don't know. I just felt the need to talk about it. It really bothers me that our community didn't worry about these guys. If that was housewives or lawyers buried out there, oh my God, it would have been like a witch hunt. They would have just wanted to hang him like immediately for all this. But because they were old winos, vagrants that were walking around Marysville, nobody gave a shit. Just sucks. Human life is human life. And I think Kenneth Whitaker's sister made the best quote. It doesn't matter if all that ever comes in your life is that you pick radishes. You're still a human being. Like, who puts value on somebody's life? Like, what ultimately makes you human being? Like, what's the line that's drawn that no longer makes you human enough to get a community to care about you and mourn? And like, they had two services. They had one at St. Isidore's by Father Bishop, which the church was the same church that Juan Corona went to. And he actually asked the congregation to think about the winos and, like, we're sorry that their way of life, their way of choosing to live, ultimately cost them their lives. But, like, Juan Corona is the victim here. So let's pray for Juan and his wife, because there's nobody else that is going through anything worse than what his family's going through. Because that trumps these victims being hacked to death. Like, going out to the orchards, being hired to dig holes for garbage, and then ultimately they were digging their own graves. Like, and then there was the memorial at Yuba City High School. They had it out at the football fields because they were worried that there was going to be way too many people. 6 priests came from, or reverends, came from the missions, the Baptist Church in Marysville, to speak on behalf of these men. 200 citizens showed up. Most of the people in attendance were the news media. So, that goes to show you how much our community gave a shit. These guys weren't worthless pieces of shit. They were trying to find work. They were trying to have a better life. These guys were all born during the Depression. They were born when they had no choice but to roam. They had to go look for work, so this became a way of life for them. It's not that they were trying to get a handout, because they weren't. They were working for it. They just got used to a certain way of life, and they wanted to roam, and they saw the countryside. They went from Oregon all the way down to Southern California, back east, back. One of them went from New York and California since he was just a little kid, just a little guy that had been dropped off on an orphanage step He had come from New York and would come to California just to seek work during the migrant, season, which is like peaches being picked and all that seasonal work. And then they would go home and they die because they wanted work.